found my eyes, and with all of her mighty love and warmth sent me a strong, silent message. You're safe now, my Lancer. I took a breath or two, pulled out a pen and a spiral notebook, and wrote a letter to a girl back in San Antonio. She and I had recently participated in a one-act drama competition. She played Eve, I played Adam, her mom was our drama teacher. I described Los Angeles as the second gayest city in the world. It wasn't a compliment. I was already fairly certain that San Francisco was in first position. But thanks to AIDS hitting the national news, when old Hollywood heartthrob Rock Hudson fell out of his closet and into his grave. Since then, even the news shows in Texas had started offering up images of emaciated gay men, most in San Francisco, but others in New York and Los Angeles dying terrible deaths thanks to their, quote, lifestyle choices. So yes, it seemed that San Francisco was closest to hellfire, but I was fairly certain Los Angeles wasn't far behind. I suppose I felt it necessary to let someone in Texas know I'd survived our journey through this very foreign land. But as we reached the top of the mountain, something in my God-fearing heart stirred, and I looked back toward the city. It was calling to me. If I'm being honest, it had started calling well before we set out on this adventure. If Los Angeles was dangerous, I was curious. How true were the stories I'd heard? Did the people there really do so many strange things to their bodies, their minds, and one another? Did they really make all those movies and TV shows I'd fallen in love with on the rare occasions we were allowed to watch them? And the most dangerous question of all, did the nation's current teen heartthrob, Ricky Schroeder, with his golden hair and ocean blue eyes, actually live somewhere down in all that chaos? That question, and all of its invasive roots and sticky webs, lingered longest in my mind as I watched the city glimmer and shine in the morning sun until it slowly disappeared behind a veil of blue-white smoke. Beginning of the beginning. So there's more of that prologue, but you sort of get a sense of a few things, and I'm just going to talk for a second about why now? Why write that book now? There was a couple of moments in my life where publishers or agents said, hey, would you write a book? Are you ready to write a book? One, when we made Milk right here, and I won an Academy Award for that. The second time, when we filed a federal lawsuit against Proposition 8, a small group of us, and took that case to the U.S. Supreme Court and had Proposition 8 overturned. I thought both of those books, though the stories might be compelling, were just really pats on the back and sounded absolutely fucking boring. So I said no. I ask my writers when I mentor, I say, especially if they're bringing me real stories, I say, well, what is the purpose? If it's just nostalgia or because you think it's a cool story, that's not going to do it. What you really have to do is figure out how that story landing in the future will affect the future in a way that's helpful and positive. What's it about? And me and my mom, a few years ago, started having conversations about how the political divide in our own family, yes, a conservative family, a Southern Texan military family, some of it Mormon family, and then folks like me, coastal, progressive, out, I went to film school instead of going on a Mormon mission, fighting for marriage equality. We started to see how the divides were getting wider and hotter, and we were very much drifting apart, and it really upset my mom. I mean, my mom was conservative too, but she was also a paralyzed woman from the age of 2, raising 3 kids on her own once I was 6 years old. We had to figure out what the connections were. We had to figure out that higher plane than politics so we could stay a family. We'd always done the hard work even when it was really, really hard to stay a family. And so after I lost my mom, and saw that what we feared then was becoming more real than we ever could have imagined, that not only was our family becoming divided, we were seeing communities becoming divided, and this nation becoming really split in two. Buying into this, what I think is a fallacy. This notion that, the miracle that we're all here, that I can see you right now, that you can hear me, that I can hear you, that we can witness each other in this insane, beautiful, majestic universe that we live in, this miracle of existence. That what we might then say that the very highest plane of this existence, of this absolute miracle that you're all here, is whether you put an R or a D on your voter registration card. That's lunacy. That's fucking crazy. And I grew up with a mom who had shown the courage and the curiosity as a conservative woman who was not happy when she found out I was gay, but actually came out to Los Angeles and was willing to hear from my LGBT friends and to get to know them. And to watch how that did start to crack things open. Personal stories, not political debate, personal storytelling. And that began to erase the misconceptions and the lies and the myths she learned from the Mormon church and from the military and from growing up in Louisiana and Texas, how that changed. And then I realized once I lost her how uncourageous I had been. How I copped out. She had shown the courage and the curiosity to come this way, and I'd lost the connection to my family and to my childhood faith. And so the last third of this book is a call to action for me, to return to Texarkana, Texas, and to see if I can't find that higher plane in politics with so much of my family who I know voted for a guy that I never could, that I couldn't bear. But could we find the higher plane? And the even more difficult challenge, which was to return to Salt Lake City, Utah, and to begin those conversations with leaders of my childhood faith to see if we could also find common ground in that higher plane. I needed to show the courage and the curiosity my mom had taught me, by example, the other direction. And that's what so many of us in this room, myself included, don't do enough of. And that's what Mama's Boy is. Mama's Boy is an offering, a small piece of our little American family that I hope might act as a pebble in the pond, with ripples perhaps affecting some other kid out there, some other parent out there, maybe a family, maybe a community, but that gets these conversations going that help us all find that higher plane again. With that said, I'm happy to turn this into a little conversation for a minute before we sign books. If anyone has any questions, particularly if anyone's actually read the book. I'm looking at you.
So, Lord, come on.
It is 1,000 degrees in here.
I'm sorry.
You do this on purpose to get
No,
us to take
the
our clothes
air
off.
conditioning's
He
not.
does it on purpose.
No.
He saw a lot of pretty people. He's like, let's get them to take it.
No,
Yes,
no.
Manny. We know, Manny.
I have a mic in case
All right.
anyone has a question.
Is there anybody?
So there are a lot of points in the book that are really emotional as well as really empowering. What was the hardest for you to either reflect on, or when you were doing your research, talking to people? Was it learning about your mother's childhood, or reflecting on your own childhood? What?
I mean, I do try to tell this story from a personal perspective, because that is what I believe can actually move hearts, right? I think that talking politics and science and the law, as interesting as it is, and as right as we all know we are, the other side is equally convinced they're right. And when we start doing it, when we start approaching others with our facts and science and the law, they just dig their trenches as deep as we've dug ours, and you don't come to anything. We're talking about something too far outside of ourselves. And so if you can bring it to the personal, which is not soft gushy, it means doing the hard work to figure out what story do I have that illuminates that fact and that law and that science. How do I make that stuff clear by using this? And once you've thought of that story, which is hopefully your own, if you don't have your own, maybe it's one step removed, but that's as far away as from your heart as it should be, then you share it. And you encourage the other person to do the same. You ask them questions. So when you're doing that with your own story, it can really be difficult. I mean, there were a lot of stories that I decided I was going to tell as candidly as I could, that absolutely I didn't want to dig back into. I didn't want to share. It hurts. I didn't want to relive losing the family members that I've lost in the last 5-10 years. I didn't want to relive junior high school. It was horrible. So yeah, there's a lot of that, but I think that's the kind of brave work we have to do, not just as me with this book, but all of us, on that even mightier stage than this book, that greatest, most powerful stage there is in the world, if you can, which is the dinner table. So if each of us individually can start to tell our stories, I think a dinner table conversation will be twice as impactful as this book. I still want you to buy it. But I think hopefully what it teaches you is you've got to do the same.
Cool. Lauren.
All right, know-it-all.
Okay, I could ask so many different questions, but I think one thing that really struck me when I read it was the amount that your mom taught you through nonverbal lessons, like just by watching her and her character and the way she worked.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you don't have to answer this, but what do you want to teach your son based off what your mom taught you?
Well, I want to teach him how to wash my car. and
Good lessons.
I know. There's a point at which chores come, right? When does that happen? I think I have a long time before that. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but because people ask us all these questions about how we're going to raise him, like, will we raise him this faith or that faith? Is he going to be in the UK or the US? Is he going to sound like Madonna? Like, what's going to happen with this little guy? And truly, I think the two greatest lessons that I learned from my mom that I hope come across in the book. One is an inheritance all the way from my grandmother. My grandmother, Koki, who was one of the only white tenant farmers on the south side of the river in Lake Providence, Louisiana, raising eventually 9 kids, mostly on her own. Very poor. CNN often calls it the poorest city in the country. But for whatever reason, she just believed that she could raise these kids and she could raise them well. And when she had a 2-year-old who came down with polio and lost her ability to move, she somehow instilled in that little girl the belief that everyone who was saying she couldn't have kids, that she would never fall in love, that she would never go to school, she would never have a job, Koki convinced that little girl that none of that's true. Yeah. And my mom inherited that from Koki. And so then when my mom is sitting there in a children's hospital in New Orleans, and she's been sliced up and down, scars up and down her body, nothing is working. She has the use of her hands and some of her arms, and that's it. But she still did not believe that she couldn't fall in love. I read the letter she was writing to the priests there, convincing them to leave the priesthood and marry her. She was still she was still flirting and trying and not giving up. And eventually, I'm standing here, or sitting here as proof that Koki was right. My mom was right. There is no such thing, and really, even if there was, no purpose in believing that anything is impossible. And my mom, I'm ruining much of the book, went on not only to have me and to fall in love, but also ended up, I won't ruin all the details, but having an incredibly esteemed career that inspired a lot of other people. So I think passing on that belief, that message that what makes you different can make you powerful, and that whatever people tell you is going to limit you because of your difference, don't listen to that. Yeah. If anything, let the anger that makes you feel motivate you. And number 2, the greatest gift I know she gave me is curiosity. You know what 2 things can't exist in the same space together? Divisiveness and curiosity. The fear that drives division and the questions that come from curiosity. They can't live together. One just makes the other go away.
Hi. Thank you for being here.
Of course. This is like the best city. I love this city. It feels like home. I wish we gotta build a 10-year board, like indoors.
There you
so
go.
I can convince my husband to move us
Maybe
in.
it's get this
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like a deep question, I'd say. But so when you like knew you were gay, did you ever feel like you were the only one? As well, I mean, like, cause thank you to you and so many other people today that I didn't have to feel that when I grew up as a kid, or
Yeah.
I'm still a kid, but what was that like?
Well,
feeling like that?
I did, I know a lot of people who had that experience that they thought they were the only one. I really hope that, partly thanks to the internet, certainly thanks to the hard work so many have done to make sure that LGBT depictions, are included in film and television, though they need to become more diverse so that more of us from different corners of our community see ourselves depicted, which will help with that loneliness thing. I mean, loneliness and isolation can be deadly. I didn't feel that because I had heard the word homosexual from the prophet of my church by 6 years old, granted comparing me to a murderer, or from the military, had a lot of colorful words for it. So did the folks in the South. So I knew within moments of my first crush what I was. I think I was bright enough to assume that because there were all these names, and because they were, people hated this tribe wherever they were, that I wasn't alone. But I was still terrified. So I think I didn't have that same isolation in that I thought I was the only one. But the shame that our faith and the military in the South put on who gay people are meant I also wouldn't meet another one until we had a turn of luck that we were transferred to Fort Ord down in Monterey, and I started coming up here. And I also hope that, well, now I'm going to get political, but I think the thing that needs to happen in this country as soon as possible, and we're getting closer, is to pass the Equality Act. Now, the Equality Act is probably going to pass the House of Representatives any day. Yeah, it's amazing. It means that, in most, I'm preaching to the choir, but in most states in this country right now, you can still be legally fired, legally kicked out of your home for being gay. You can get married on Sunday, you put that picture up at work on Monday, legally fired, right? Now, the damage there is at least twofold. One, people are being kicked out of their homes and losing their jobs, particularly people in the trans community. But number two, what it really does, and what's more sinister about it, and why I think that folks really are railing against these kinds of pieces of legal protection, is that if we are afraid we'll lose our job and afraid we'll lose our home, what are we not doing? Coming out. We're not telling our stories. We're not being visible. Even our kids have to lie at school about who their parents are. And so the stories aren't being told. The personal stories aren't being shared. So the lies aren't being corrected. The misconceptions aren't being dispelled. And things stay as they are. The fear and the division remain. And the shame remains. So when you hear people talking about the Equality Act, yes, think jobs and think homes. But please also think about how they're trying to silence us. And that it's working in places like where I'm from, Texas and Arkansas and Louisiana. And really, the next victory I'd like to see is for young gay people around the country to be able to stay home when they come out. To feel like they can stay in Texas if they love Texas and barbecue and whatever else. They can stay in their community, they can stay in their faith, they can stay with their family. They don't have to go to LA or New York or San Francisco to be safe anymore. And that's what the Equality Act, that'll be one of the things that happens when we pass that. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take electing a president who will sign it, let's be honest.
Thank you.
I have some water for you, Lance.
All right.
See?
I wanted something stronger.
That's after the Q&A.
All right.
All right, next question.
Thanks for coming.
My question is about the stories that are coming out of Hollywood and that Hollywood is telling. Do you feel like the stories that are coming out are up to the challenges of our time? And what would you like to see Hollywood doing more of?
Oh, well, I haven't seen everything in the past year because I've been working on a new series, and I tend to avoid everything but Great British Bake Off and Game of Thrones. So I can't be. What I can talk about a bit is, I am heartened by how particularly LGBT storylines, but also other minority groups are being depicted in more frequently. But the good news is there are studies now. GLAB has their studies. UCLA has done a study about diversity. And what we also know is that we're not being depicted, not just LGBT people, but other people who are underrepresented because of the color of their skin or who the God they pray to. We are not being depicted in film and television in the numbers that we exist in real life. Film and television is a lie still. It is still a lie, told by mostly straight white men who don't always even realize they're lying. But the pictures they're painting of the world we live in does not reflect the real world yet. I won't be happy until we get to that place. What I'd like to see happen, and the way you fix it, is the Writers Guild of America has an obligation to pressure studios, networks, and productions to hire writers who are diverse and to make those writers' rooms look like what the world looks like. When you do that, we'll have depictions that not only look more like what the real world looks like, but they'll be painted in more authentic fashion, right? Because we'll be depicting ourselves. So, I mean, I think that's the work that Hollywood has to do, is to fill those writers' rooms more fairly.
Thank you for being here. So I was a Mormon missionary.
Wow, what's your last name?
Hill.
Hello, Brother Hill.
Hello. Actually living about a half mile from here, so if I knocked on anyone's doors, I apologize. And now, 12 years later, I'm out, gay man, living very near here. And so I've lived in both of these worlds and know kind of the extremes, the good and bad that exist on both sides of the line. And I find myself often both outraged with my church and defending it on the same day.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the stories that we tell about the other side are often extreme and inaccurate. So how do you inspire your friends? How do we inspire our friends on one side of the line to go and be curious about the truth that's happening on the other side and find that humanity that you've talked about?
I mean, it's a great question. How do we do it? I mean, I wrote a book about it. I'm preaching it as I go around the country. Do you know Troy Williams in Salt Lake City?
Yeah, good friend
Yeah,
of mine,
of course.
actually. Yeah.
So Troy called. I was doing a speaking, this tour, and also just listening and being, put your feet where your mouth is. And he said, "Great, I'm glad you're doing a book tour. So how many days does Utah get?" And I'm not just talking about Salt Lake City. We're going down to Lehigh and Provo, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know, 1." He's like, 3. I was like, "Okay." So that's what we do. You just answer the call. I mean, sometimes that's an easy one. It was an incoming call. So the next 3, I fly to Salt Lake City in the morning. So I'm going to have all the drinks I can here now. But I'm with you. I mean, we come up against it. I wrote a show called Big Love for 6 years, and I swear it was such a shock. I spent most of my time defending our childhood church because there are good things about it. Listen, I learned how to wage a Supreme Court battle listening to the Mormon Church and conservatives. That I wouldn't have waged that fight if my mom had not come to me after that Oscar speech where I promised federal equality, and she said, "Lance, you made a promise, and a promise is a sacred thing." Mormon. And so I stopped making movies for 5 years and fulfilled the promise. Stand up straight and tall, right? And demand everything you know you deserve. That's a conservative value. That's a Mormon value. It's also what we needed to do in the gay rights movement, is to demand all 50 states. There's so much, family comes first. mean, talk about a value that I could absolutely translate to my gay family, and how you prioritize what you're doing. I mean, the Mormon Church taught me how to wage LGBT civil rights battles. I've used it against them a few times. Yeah. But we've kept the avenues of communication open, and that's led to some progress and hopefully more revelations. Let's see what this new prophet has up his sleeve. Keeps happening. I know. Keep going, buddy. Keep going.
What do you think? One or two more questions, Lance?
Yeah, let's do one or two.
Up to you. You have to pick the person.
Oh, don't do Sandy. That's my cousin Sandy.
Okay, am I gonna ask for permission or forgiveness?
All right, go on. Do you want? This is always dangerous.
Go, Sandy.
Go, Sandy.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, my first thing is thank you for writing the book.
Oh, thanks.
And I would say you do know how proud we are as your family. You do know. I know you know that. So
I
my
do.
question is, why 395 pages?
Yeah. All right. No, talk to my editor. I can't believe you came in here and did that. Yeah. Well, because I will answer that because it's not my story. When you guys crack it open and read it, it's not me. My story is being written. This is my mom's story. This starts in 1948. It's a good question. It starts in 1948 in Lake Providence, Louisiana, and you meet a woman named Cokie who's got these like thrift store glasses with quote unquote diamonds in the corners. Like, yeah. So,
My grandmother.
yeah. And I never got to meet her, but I inherited so much of who I am from her. And it's, you know, when you write a book like this, you got to figure out what it's about. And it's not. This book is not about me. I'm a supporting character in it. So, and I think from Cokie to my mom and everything they accomplished, and I was able to witness and grow from. They deserve 590 pages, and I kept it short.
Will you please write another book, like Paul Harvey said, and now the rest of the story?
Yeah, well.
All that stuff you haven't cut.
I'll tell if whoever wants to go to the mix and buy me a Crown Royal and ginger ale tonight, I'll tell them the rest of the story right there.
I believe that's an offer.
Yeah, they can get the story. All right, one more.
Last question.
Thank you, Sandy.
Crown Royal and what?
Ginger ale. Yeah, Crown and ginger.
Kevin, you want the mic?
Oh, hey, I'm Kevin Bard. I'm president of the Harvey Milk LGBTQ Democratic Club. I raced back from a board meeting to say hi to you. I was really curious. Your husband is from England.
Yeah.
Does he have any stories of homophobia in England? Have you seen any homophobia in England? And what's the difference between the experiences there and here?
It's a great question because it's a shifting landscape right now. So do we have examples? Let me set the scene. I mean, the United Kingdom has been really far ahead of the rest of the world, really, on LGBT rights and protection issues. I mean, they've been doing great. But let me tell you, just so you know, the pendulum swings backward everywhere. I'll tell you a personal story and then one that doesn't have as much to do with me. The personal one is we had our son 10 months ago, and we fly back to we fly back from Los Angeles to London, and on the cover of the Daily Mail, which is like the has the highest whatever sales whatever. Everybody reads it. It's trash. But on the cover, it said, "Gay dads are not the new normal," with a picture of me and Tom. Yeah, that was the narrative. That was out there. I mean, I don't know if they totally missed it that Elton John and David Furnish had a couple at that point, but that was an attack that came our way, and it didn't feel good. And a lot of people said, "Oh, that is a sign of this sort of gathering strength of this kind of homophobia returning, and what are we going to do about it?" And thankfully, me and my husband just said, "Well, we'll just do a podcast, and we're going to invite them all in to talk to us, these people." And we did. It started to focus more on surrogacy. We started there with the conversation around surrogacy, and then about gay dads. It got to the point. And you can listen to it on BBC Sounds. It's nominated for Best Podcast of the Year. But you very quickly got to the root of what the big concern was, which was really interesting. When you show the curiosity and the courage to actually talk to them, which it was really uncomfortable at first, but eventually what it came down to is that a lot of these conservative folks worried that gay couples, two men, that their son or daughter would not have any female influence. They wouldn't meet any women. To which was really easy to explain very quickly, you must not know gay men. Like, we love women. There's going to be women everywhere. We just don't sleep with them in that way. Like, that's the difference. And honestly, once that was explained, it started just to kind of the debate was sort of over. And the gay dad's new normal thing just kind of went away. I mean, it's still there a little. The thing that's really very, very disturbing in the United Kingdom right now, which has been so good on LGBT, is this anti-trans language adopted from some of the most conservative folks and think tanks in the United States, has begun to seep into some of the LGBT world. And certainly in the conservative world. And there's this anti-trans backlash going on in the United Kingdom right now that we're having to fight against, and to remind our gay and lesbian and bisexual brothers and sisters that we have to stand up for these family members of ours. That we are a family, that we are a coalition. Though our interests are quite different, that at the end of the day, if they start taking away trans rights, we're next. And that our trans brothers and sisters, at least in this country, I know for sure because I was there in the marriage debate, in the marriage fight, were always there with us, even when it didn't benefit them and that community. And I worry that if the United Kingdom could be suffering those sorts of backlashes, that could end up here as well, easily. So, because it's the last question, I'll just end with this thing that when I go around speaking to universities in particular, and to these really passionate, bright-eyed, energy-filled young folks who want to be in activism and want to make a difference and want to make a change, they often ask a question, I think, before really diving in, just to make sure, and they say, yeah, I want to do it, I want to make a difference, I want to make a change, I want to move the needle. How long do we have to do this for? And I said, oh, there's good news there, baby. You get to do it forever. Yeah, that's right. That this work that we have to do, our rights will never be secure even in a place like the United Kingdom. We will always, as minorities, have to defend our gains and to continue to push forward. And that's wonderful, wonderful news. Because this work, we don't need it to end. It would be great if we all lived more equal, fair lives. But we don't need it to end because it feeds our soul. And it feeds our communities. And it feeds our families. So yes, let's keep the fight alive, particularly in that Harvey Milk Democratic Club. We are. Yes, because it feeds the soul and it feeds our communities, and we need it. All right, thanks, guys, very much.
Thank you, guys. If you'll allow me, I'm just going to plug a couple upcoming events while you're here. We're really, really honored to have Dustin Lance Black here, someone who is an artist, an ingenue, an activist, an award winner, and an inspiration to so many of us around the world. So thank you very much, Lance.
Cut it out. Plug your events.
Okay, I'm going to plug my events. So this weekend we have a couple things. On Saturday,